Good morning, good morning. Welcome back to our next installment of Samuel 17. We'll take the first half of chapter today. We've been spending a few days getting set up, find out exactly who Goliath is. So now we got a good understanding of where Goliath origin is from. I find it fascinating. So now David is going to enter the scene, and that he's going to be doing some regular stuff that his father Jesse had sent him to do when he finds out about Goliath. So that's what we'll look at today. That's the first half of chapter 17. The second half is actually the battle itself, and we'll take that on next week. It's quite a long chapter and quite a long story. But what's fascinating about this whole story is the fact that David and Goliath, the two entities, you can almost look at that as the war between God's side and Satan. Because we got David, who we'll find out in the future is one of God's most beloved kings. And as a matter of fact, David has a future. We may talk about this at some time. That he's going to be represented. He's actually going to be assisting Jesus on his throne in the Millennium Kingdom. David is actually partakes in that. And we know that Jesus is actually going to reign on David's throne from Jerusalem in the Millennium Kingdom. So David kind of represents that entity, God, Jesus Christ. Where Goliath represents evil, Satan, the war between the two. So symbolically here we have the war. And symbolically we're going to see that the prevailing person in this war is going to be God, as we see when David succeeds. So let's look at this setup. And I just wanted to kind of take a look at that really quick. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the backstory here, but I find it fascinating that as we go through this, keep in the back of your mind this ongoing war between God and Satan. So let's put some verses up in here, and we'll start off with a map of the actual battle. Where we are at this point with the battle. The battle hasn't happened yet, but the green line is the Philistines. They're in this valley here. The blue line is Saul and his men, and then David is going to be sent out from Bethlehem over to see what's happening. So you can kind of see it in this map. And we'll be talking about these places as we go through today. But first off, let's look at this ongoing battle and how God is ultimately going to succeed in this battle also. So let's bring the verses in. Let's take a look at something here that this ongoing battle that started all the way back in Genesis 3. And ultimately, Satan will be thrown out of heaven at some point. He's not allowed. He doesn't reside in heaven anymore, but he is allowed to go there and actually complain about us mostly. But at some point in the middle of the tribulation period, he's going to be thrown out of heaven for good, and that's when the real battle starts. That's actually in Revelation 12, and I'm just going to read verses 7 through 9. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon is Satan. And the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was there a place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, the old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. That's ultimately going to happen in the middle of the tribulation, and he'll be permanently on earth until his imprisonment in the bottomless pit, which we see, and of course Satan's ultimate demise happens in Revelation 20, verses 7 through 10. I always like to look at the back of the book to see who wins. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of which is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth and compressed the camp of the saints about the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. So that's ultimately what's going to happen. But I love the pattern here between David and Goliath. And in a way, God shows us what the ultimate destruction is going to be. So let's dig in here. So which, just as we see in the final battle over Satan, here we have a pattern of David as Jesus and Goliath as Satan and evil. So let's dig in the first one. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shurkoth, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shurkoth and Azakoth. Now you can see it right there, Shurkoth and Azakoth, which belongeth to Judah. So this general area is Judah. And pitched between Ephas the Damean. And I might show you another picture here in a second. Going to 1 Samuel 13:5. Speaking of gathering together. And the Philistines gathered themselves together to fight with Israel. 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. And they came up and pitched in Michmash, eastward from Bethaven. Location of the Philistine camp. Sokoth, which is modern-day Khirbet Abedad, was a town in the Shepheth Valley, about 14 miles west of Bethlehem. So that's about where we are right here in this map. Near Philistine territory. This site has been surveyed and actually has produced ceramic remains dated to this period. So archaeology actually proved that this was a location of these people groups. Azkah, modern Tel Az-Zarikah, was a fortress 3 miles northwest of Sokoh, which controlled the main roads between the Elah Valley. This valley we're in is called Elah. The site was excavated earlier this century, uncovering a rectangular fortress with 4 towers that was dated to this period. This area was of strategic importance to both sides as the main pass between the Philistine plain and the Judean hills. The main road through the Shephlia region heads north from Lachish to Azkiah. But about a mile south of Azkiah, a road goes east following the Wadi El Saint that opens into Elah Valley. Ephes Demin has not been positively identified, but would largely be located in this area. I actually have a map of this. I actually have a picture of this area too. This is what it looks like for real. Obviously, it's a modern-day picture because there's a road there. You can see how it's diagrammed. So Saul's camp would have been up here on this hillside, and the Philistine camp would have been over here. This is a creek that we just mentioned, and it's Sokoh in Judea. So this is called the Valley of Elah. And so this is where the battle would have taken place, right over here somewhere, between David and Goliath. So I'll put the map back because I'll be mentioning places in here. So in 1 Chronicles 11:13 speaks to this also. He was with David at Pasdammim, and there the Philistines were gathered together to battle, where was a parcel of ground full of barley, and the people fled from before the Philistines. So this was an agricultural area also. There was a time it was full of barley. Okay, on to verse 2. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And speaking of this valley, 1 Samuel 21:9 also speaks about it. We'll get to this chapter, but a little sneak peek. And the priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou stewest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, take it, for there is no other save that thee." And David said, "There is none like that. Give it to me." You'll see that David actually becomes in possession of the actual sword of Goliath, and it ends up being stored in the temple for a period of time until David. So the priest here is basically saying the only one who deserves this sword is you. So the story isn't ended yet. But back to Samuel 17. Verse 3, and the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side. And there was a valley between them, as we can see here in this picture. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of his coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. I know I mentioned yesterday to find out what that weighs. Let me just quick Google it on my phone. Shekel of brass. I know I promised you yesterday to look it up, and I didn't look it up. I actually looked in the Bible. I couldn't find it. S-H-E-K-E-L-S. Shekels of brass. Weight. The term shekel has been used for a unit of weight around 9.6 to 9.8 grams, or about 0.3 ounces. So let's say it's about 0.4 ounces. So it was 5,000 shekels. So 5,000 times 0.4. 5,000 times 0.4 equals 2,000 ounces divided by 16. 125 pounds. That's heavy. So you can see that no mere man could actually pick that thing up and hold it in a battle. Let's say you might be able to pick it up, but it'd be tough to fight a battle with it. Okay, continuing on. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spearhead weighed 600 shekels. So that would be somewhere around 2,400, probably. Well, I'll figure it out since we're talking about it. 600 times 0.4 equals divided by 16 ounces in a pound, 15 pounds. Just the head of the spear weighed 15 pounds. So when they first approached the promised land, most of the Israelites had been afraid to enter because of the giants living there. And we see this actually in Numbers 13, 32, and 33. And they brought up an evil report of the land which had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search, it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which came of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. We go back to the map for a second, and realize that what we're talking about here, there's Hebron. You keep going south, the area they're talking about, they actually came up into this area that would have been, the Philistines were over basically in this general area where Gaza is today. You can see Gath. Gath is actually part of Gaza. So this general area is Gaza. And so that's where the Philistines were. And so when they came up from the south, they were heading towards this area, and they sent men up to search this area and see what they found. So you can see that Goliath and his group were already here in that time frame. So when they had first approached the promise, there's also mention of King Og of Bashan. Bashan is up in this area up here. I should have got a different map so I could show you these places. I've shown them to you plenty of times before, but it's up the river valley, and keep going up. And Bashan is actually on the would be the east side of the river, and it's up northern, like across from the Sea of Galilee area. That's Bashan. So this king Og of Bashan needed a bed over 13 feet long. We see that mentioned in Deuteronomy 3:11. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. It is not in Rabbath of the children of Ammon. 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of it, about the cubit of a man. So like I said, that's somewhere between 18 and 20 inches is a cubit. And so 20 inches, I just use that, it's easier to multiply. That would be 9 times 20 would be 180 inches divided by 12. That's 10 feet would be 120. So another 60. So that'd be like 15-foot bed. So no one needs a 15-foot bed unless they're a very tall person. That's the point they're making. Actually, in my notes it says the bed was over 13 feet long. So now Goliath, over 9 feet tall, taunted Israel's soldiers and appeared invincible to them. I've seen 9 feet and I've seen 10 feet on Goliath. Like again, it depends on the measurement and whose arm they're using. Usually, typically for a cupid. A cupid is from the tip of the middle finger to the elbow. That's a cupid. So Saul, the tallest of the Israelites, may have been especially worried because he was obviously the best match for Goliath. In God's eyes, though, however, Goliath was no different than anyone else. And then when David comes in and he's going to be prevalent in helping people to understand that. So let's look at a few statistics about Goliath, some verses on Goliath. 1 Samuel 17:23 that we just read. We'll get to it. As he talked with them, behold, there came up in the champion of the field Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. Also 1 Samuel 21:9. We'll get to that today, that verse. And the priest said, the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slowest in the valley of Elah, behold, is here wrapped in a cloth. Oh, I already read that one once. And 2 Samuel 21:19. And there was again a battle in Gob with the Philistines, where Elan, the son of Jerugam, a Bethlehemite, slew the brother of Goliath the Gittite. I'm picking up these verses. I want you to see that Goliath had 4 brothers, just as tall. And here we see one of the brothers, the staff of whose spear was like a weaver's beam, so you can see it described the same way. Also in 1 Chronicles 25. And there was war again with the Philistines, and Elan, the son of Jair, slew Lahimi, the brother of Goliath the Gittite, whose spear staff was like a weaver's beam. So there's 2 brothers. And then looking at 1 Samuel 27:4, and it was told Saul that David was fled to Gath, and he sought no more again for him. That verse is just showing that Gath was a real place. And Joshua 11:22, there was none of the Anakims left in the land of the children of Israel, only in Gaza and Gath and Ashdod there remained. So again, that same general area that's known as it's where Hamas is today, or the Gaza Strip. 2 Samuel 21:16. And Ishabenob, which was one of the sons of the giant, the weight of his spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight. He had been girded with a new sword, thought to have slain David. So there's another giant mentioned. 2 Samuel 21:17. But Ashani, the son of Zeruiah, succumbed him and smote the Philistine and killed him. Then the men of David swore unto him, saying, Thou shalt go no more out with us to battle, that thou quench not the light of Israel. 2 Samuel 21:18. And it came to pass after this, that there was again a battle with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbechai the Heshlamite slew Seth, which was one of the sons of the giant. It sounds like the 4th brother. And there was again a battle in God with the Philistine, where Elan, the son of Jerugam, a Bethlehemite, slew the brother of Goliath the Gittite. I already read that one. I think I'm repeating myself here. So let's head on to the next chapter. So you can see what I'm talking about. There was more than just one giant, in other words. On to 17, back to our text, verses 8 and 9. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are you come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and yet servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. So he's trying to convince people, this Goliath, to send out a man, and this was actually pretty often done. Let me just read verse 9, and I'll explain. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if you prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. An army often avoided the high cost of battle by pitting the strongest warrior against the strongest warrior of the enemy. This avoided great bloodshed because the winner of the fight was considered the winner of the battle. Goliath had the definite advantage against David from a human standpoint. But Goliath didn't realize that in fighting David, he also had to fight God. Actually, we see a similar battle like this in 2 Samuel 2:12 through 16. Let's look at that. And Abner, the son of Ner, and the servants of Ishaboth, the son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and the servant of David went out and met together by the pool of Gibeon. And they sat down, the one on one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. And Abner said to Joab, Let the young men now arise and play before us. And Joab said, Let them arise. Then they arose and went over by number 12 of Benjamin, which pertained to Ishaboth, the son of Saul, and 12 of the servants of David. And they caught every one his fellow by the head, and thrust his sword into the fellow's side, so that they fell down together. Therefore the place was called, big long word there, Helakahazazerim, which is in Gibeon. So that was a similar battle that happened between David and Saul. Okay, back to our text though. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. So he's still pursuing. I defy the armies of Israel. So he's trying to entice them to fight. Some other verses on this, and 1 Samuel 17. We'll actually see this when we get to 1 Samuel 17, 25 and 26. So I won't bother reading them here. 17:11. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. I would be too, from a human standpoint. That's the story we're talking about here. Like I said, the pattern. David represents the faith of God. David had a lot of faith that God would protect, would be there with him. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of an Ephraimite of Benjamin, Judea, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons, and the man went among men of the old man in the days of Saul. So remember when Samuel went and actually chose David to be king. He's not king yet. This is still before that. And he's been Saul recognized David as a asset. So actually, at first, Saul didn't have any problems with David, but later on, we'll see that Saul becomes very jealous of David because he knows he has God's ear. But speaking of David and how it's interesting how David came to be. If you study the book of Ruth, you're going to see that if it wasn't for that situation in Ruth, then David probably never would have existed. He's actually in the genealogy from Ruth. We see that in Ruth 4:18 through 22. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Ram, and Ram begot Amminadab. Amminadab begot Nahshon, and Nahshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz, and Boaz begot Obed. It was Boaz that married Ruth. And Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. So if it wasn't for the marriage between Boaz and Ruth, David never would have been existed. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. And speaking about being a Bethlehemite, an Ephraimite, we see that back in Genesis 35:16. They journeyed from Bethel, and there was but a little way to come to Ephrath, and Rachel travailed, and she had hard labor. That's when I'll think of it in a minute. Rachel had hard labor with Benjamin, so that's where the Benjamites came from. So it would have been descendants of David here. David was now right now David was between about 16 and 17 years old. We see a reference to this in 1 Chronicles 2:13 through 16. And Jesse begat his firstborn Eliab, and Abinadab the second, and Shimei the third, Nathan the fourth, Radadai the fifth, Ozem the sixth, and David was the seventh. Interesting number, the seventh. Whose sisters were Zurah and Abigail, and the sons of Zurah was Abishai and Joab and Ashel, three. So that was David's siblings, his 6 brothers. Okay, continuing on, verse 13 of our text. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went down and followed Saul to battle. So they were old enough to be actually members of the army. The names of these 3 sons that went to battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and next unto him Abinadab, and then the third Shimei. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. When you remember back a couple of chapters ago, I remember when Saul was having problems, having evil dreams, and they called for David, who knew how to play the harp. It would soothe his spirit. So David was going back and forth between Saul and his father, and tending his father's sheep back in Bethlehem. This is kind of important because we're going to see later on that it doesn't seem like Saul recognizes David, even though David was helping him out. For some people think that maybe Saul had some kind of a double personality or something. What's that called? I know it's called bipolar. Anyways. So the idea being here is that we saw that David did return from seeing Saul, and we saw that back in chapter 16, verses 19 through 23. Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse, and said, Send me David thy son, which is with the sheep. And Jesse took an ass laden with bread, and a bottle of wine, and a kid, and sent them by David his son unto Saul. And David came to Saul, and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor-bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, Let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he hath found favor in my sight. And it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took a harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. It was probably more so that the evil spirit left because David was there. David was God's man. You see these interesting patterns we see going on here. Okay, so back to our text, verse 16. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. So why would this go on for 40 days while at one side attacking the other? They were camped on opposite sides of a valley with steep walls. Wherever would rush down the valley and up the steep cliffs would be at a disadvantage at the beginning of the battle, and probably suffered great casualties. Each side was waiting for the other one to attack. Okay, verses 17 and 18. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren. So it really ain't that far away. What did we say it was? Like 12 miles or something from Bethlehem to where they're at? Not very far. Which I find this verse interesting. Who put it in Jesse's mind for David to go down there and take this stuff to his brethren, almost like a care package almost. So now David's father Jesse, verse 18, and carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of the 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. So find out how they're doing and see how the battle. Basically, Jesse was curious, I guess, about the battle. I find it interesting that I wonder if the Holy Spirit put the thought in Jesse's mind to send David, especially since David is going to be the victor here. So now David's father Jesse is sending David to bring some food to his brothers and get some information on how it's going. You see a very similar thing happening in Genesis 37:14. And he said to him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. That was actually Joseph, going to see how his brothers were going, which turned kind of disastrous. Everybody considers Joseph to be another example of a pattern for Jesus Christ. But this is kind of like a care package from home. If you've ever been in the military, it was always nice to get maybe some home-baked cookies or something from mom when you're in the military. That I kind of see this a very similar way. Kind of raise the spirits of the guys. But I believe God put this thought into Jesse for what we will see David do. And by the way, parched corn described is actually grain plucked, just as it was ripening, and roasted in a pan or on an iron plate. Arabs still eat parched corn as an important element in their diet today. Okay, verses 19 and 20. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. So let's look at that picture again of the valley. So that trench they're talking about is basically in this general area here. Valley of Elah. It's actually a creek here, so that might be what they call the trench. Verse 21 through 23. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion of the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. So again, the same words he'd been counting every day for the last 40 days. We saw those back in the beginning in verse 4 through 10. We'll just look at it again for a reminder. And there went on a champion of the camp of the Philistine named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits. Now we can skip over some of this. Verse 8. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are you come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants of Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. So he left his sheep with a keeper. Another pattern of Jesus as our shepherd, always is watching and caring for us. I love all these little patterns. If you look hard enough, you'll see them all over the place. I had Chuck Bissell used to say that if you look hard enough, you'll find Jesus Christ on every page in the Bible. Okay, moving on. Verses 21 through 23. Did I read 21 through 23 already? Oh yeah, I did already. And where it says accordingly, and in verse 23 is what I was looking at. As he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion of the Philistines, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words. So I already showed you those words. Losing track of my notes here. Now we're in verses 24 and 25. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, Have you seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And he shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with a great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. The king will give his daughter, but with an interesting reason. We'll actually get into this more detail because it will be David that gets this daughter. We'll see what happens in chapter 18. But one other time that this is quite a common occurrence, that great champions in war would a lot of times the king would give their daughter to that victor of a battle. And we see this in Joshua 15:16 also. And Caleb said, "He that smiteth Kirthath Sephir and taketh it, to him will I give Achsah my daughter to wife." So it was pretty common occurrence for an army commander to give a daughter as a reward to a victor for a battle. And we're going to see David's going to do the same thing in chapter 18, but with a little bit of a twist to it. So I'm going to save it for chapter 18. Okay, on to verse 26. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth the Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the enemies of the living God? So David spoke up, and he's questioning why the people are not taking on this guy, knowing that God is with them. What a difference perspective can make. Most of the onlookers saw only a giant. David, however, saw a mortal man defying Almighty God. Goliath was a target too big to miss. He knew he would not be alone when he faced Goliath. God would fight with him. He looked at his situation from God's point of view. Who or what are the giants you are facing? Viewing impossible situations from God's point of view helps us to put giant problems in perspective. Once we see clearly, we can fight more effectively. So it mentions there the reproach. David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall we be done to this man that killeth the Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? The reproach, we see a similar verse in 1 Samuel 11:2. And Nahash the Amorite answered them, On this condition will I make a covenant with you, that I will thrust out all your right eyes and lay it for a reproach upon all Israel. So, in other words, there was a condition that if you allow me to do something, then how do you say it? They'll have peace with Israel, but usually it's something so drastic that you wouldn't want to do it either way. Like this one here, it says, if you let me thrust out all your right eyes. So obviously it's something that is an impossibility for the person to do. And speaking of the uncircumcised Gentile, it mentioned here the uncircumcised. We see in 1 Samuel 14:6. And Jonathan said to the young man that bare his armor, Come, and let us go over unto the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by a few. That was the battle we talked about in chapter 14, where Jonathan and his armor bearer went over and took that camp and destroyed that camp. Just two of them took on, I forgot how many were in the camp. But having the faith of God behind you, it's amazing what you can accomplish. And he mentions the living God, living always in contrast to idols. We see this in 2 Kings 19:4. It may be the Lord thy God will hear all the words of Rakshak, when the king of Assyria his master had sent to reproach the living God, and will reprove the words which the Lord thy God hath heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left. So when you take on the living God, watch out. You are not going to win. Okay. Back to verse 27 and 28. And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And Eliab, his eldest son, eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men. Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why comest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart, But thou art come down that I mightest see the battle. His brother is riddling him that, oh, you're just coming down to see the battle. Eliab's anger, though, is a pattern of Joseph, which again was another Jesus pattern, and how Joseph and David are true to God's word and have tremendous faith. So like that, what we're talking about here is, you remember Joseph was taken captive because his brothers sold him into slavery. That was actually God's plan all along, that David would get down into Egypt and be able to save his family during the famine. We see this in Genesis 37:4. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. We get a similar situation here between David and his older brothers, probably because he was anointed to be king and his brothers weren't. Also in Genesis 37:8, and his brethren said to him, shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. The dreams they had were the fact that they were going to actually bow down to his brother, which they did when they didn't recognize him and came to Egypt to get corn, to get food during the famine. That's an interesting dream because it actually shows up again. I did Revelation 12 earlier. The beginning of Revelation 12 actually talks about that dream. It uses it as symbolic of the 12 tribes of Israel. So you'll actually see it show up, and it helps you to understand the verse better in Revelation 12:1. Okay, continuing on. Verse 29. We're almost done for today. We're already 40 minutes. And David said, what have I done? What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. So here David is basically stating that he is going to go and fight this Philistine. Criticism could not stop David. While the rest of the army stood around, he knew the importance of taking action. With God to fight for him, there was no reason to wait. People may try to discourage you with negative comments or mockery, but continue to do what you know is right. By doing what is right, you will be pleasing God, whose opinion matters the most. One verse to add on to this, verse 32, in Deuteronomy 20, verse 1. When thou goest out to battle against thine enemies, and seest horses and chariots and people more than thou, be not afraid of them, for the Lord thy God is with thee, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. So I'll stop there for today, and next week we'll get into the actual battle where David defeats Goliath, as the name gave it, and it'll be verses 33 through 58 if you want to read ahead. Tomorrow we'll be in Amos again, back in Amos, finishing up there. Not quite done there yet. I don't remember how many more weeks we got for that one, but looking forward to it. And so we'll see you again tomorrow when we're in Amos. So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, oh Lord, thank you for this lesson. And we love the patterns, Lord, as we see them showing that the Messiah, your Son, Jesus Christ, how he's going to be the same individual when it comes to taking over the world and eliminating the enemies of Israel and for the world, as we'll see in the future. Looking forward to that day, Lord, when perfect government under King Jesus and David being one of his princes. Looking forward to seeing that day, Lord. In Jesus' precious name I pray. Amen. Yeah, if you're interested in that particular time frame of the Millennium Kingdom, when David comes on the scene again during that period of time, he'll have a role in the government of that time frame under King Jesus. I did a study known as the Millennium Kingdom. It's on the YouTube channel and also on my website, the link to it. And If that interests you, I did a whole series on the Millennium Kingdom and this idea behind what it's going to look a little bit like. And a lot of it's written out in uh, Ezekiel 40 through 48. So have a great day, and we will see you again tomorrow.